Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. It's 4 o'clock in New York. With every inch of marble and gold gilding that Donald Trump has personally instructed to be installed inside the White House, with every swanky party, even the Gatsby one, every foreign dignitary, every business tycoon, every tech mogul billionaire that's been wined and dined very opulently by Donald Trump, comes a dawning realization among his once very loyal supporters that when Donald Trump said America first, what he actually meant was Trump and the billionaires first. The cracks in the MAGA coalition are getting bigger and bigger by the day. Donald Trump's political standing is plunging as he walks away very publicly from the campaign promises he made to the country and, importantly for this conversation, his own supporters just 12 months ago. New York Times puts it like this, quote, President Trump has been dining with Wall Street bigwigs. He's embarked on an opulent revamp of the White House at a time when Americans are struggling to pay their bills. He has expressed support for granting visas to skilled foreigners to take jobs in the U.S. He approved a $20 billion bailout for Argentina, helping a foreign government and wealthy investors at a moment when the U.S. government was shut down. For a president who returned to office promising to avoid foreign entanglements, to make life more affordable and ensure that available jobs go to American citizens, it has been a significant departure from the expectations of his loyal base. And it is starting to open a rift with his supporters who were counting on a more aggressively populist agenda. Add to all of that, as reported by today's New York Times, his very public betrayal of his campaign pledge to release the Epstein files, and Republican allies of Trump, at least a few of them, are finding their red lines. Congressman Thomas Massie, who has broken with Trump over Epstein, had this to say.
Donald Trump has announced a new platform that shocked everyone.
For many years, I have been searching for opportunities that allow people not just to survive, but to thrive in today's economy. And today, I am ready to share with you one of the most promising areas I have created, which will help many people achieve financial freedom and confidence in the future. Follow again bit.com, enter the special word USA25 to claim your wonderful bonus of 1,500 USDT. Make America great again.
I vote with my party 91% of the time, and which means I have agreed with the president 91% of the time. But when they're protecting pedophiles, when they are blowing our budget, when they are starting wars overseas, I'm sorry, I can't go along with that. And back home, people agree with me.
When it comes to the Trump administration's failures to address the affordability crisis in America, Donald Trump has tried everything except actually the things that would lower the prices of things, lower the cost of living. First, Trump tried to claim that rising prices was just a con job carried out by the Democrats. And now J.D. Vance sounds insane, throwing every excuse at the wall in hopes that something will stick.
They're expensive because we inherited this terrible inflation crisis from the Biden administration. A lot of young people are saying housing is way too expensive. Why is that? Because we flooded the country with 30 million illegal immigrants who were taking houses that ought by right go to American citizens.
So the worst of the worst, which is who they say they're deporting, have stolen all the houses, 30 million of them? Okay. Inflation has been rising for the last 5 months, and it's now the same as it was when President Joe Biden left office, thanks in no small part to tariffs put in place by Donald Trump. That $30 million undocumented immigrants he cited, that is false. It's not a real number. And economists don't believe that any immigrants, the ones they've targeted for deportation, or people who are here legally or going through a legal process, have anything to do with the current surge in housing prices. In other words, J.D. Vance is gaslighting, again, the entire country, but also the Trump MAGA base, just like Donald Trump has become very accustomed and comfortable doing these days. And again, they're getting called out by prominent members of their own coalition. Here is Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people.
And so gaslighting the people and trying to tell them that prices have come down is not helping. It's actually it's actually infuriating people, because people know what they're paying at the grocery store. They know what they're paying for their kids' clothes and school supplies. They know what they're paying for their electricity bills. And so that approach does not work. We need compassion and show that we care about the American people, and show that we are in the trenches with them on what they're going through. That's first and foremost. You don't gaslight them, you don't lecture them, and you don't deny what's happening.
Ooh, Marjorie Taylor Greene just took away your 3 favorite tools, J.D. Vance. An out-of-touch Trump administration losing the support of their own base and some of their most prominent backers is where we start today with some of our favorite experts and friends. Co-founder and executive director of Protect America and former associate White House counsel Ian Basson's back with us. Also joining us, staff writer for The Atlantic, David Frum, is here. He's also the host of the video podcast, The David Frum Show, and MSNBC political analyst, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller's here. Tim, they have blamed and sought to dehumanize people in this country illegally, as well as asylum seekers. Since the beginning of the MAGA brand, it actually predates J.D. Vance's attachment to the brand. But this smear from J.D. Vance that the housing crisis is because of 30 million people in this country illegally seems like the bottom of the rungs that they've touched, and I've stopped saying that they can't go any lower. But it also doesn't have any association with the truth. But it does reveal, it's like mask off, or we're just going to blame people who've come to this country from other places for absolutely everything. See if we can stir the hate pot a little more frothy.
Yeah, it's funny. As somebody who has to suffer through J.D. Vance's interviews, a couple of weeks ago, he was on, I think it was the New York Post, and he was telling a different story about immigrant housing. He was once again smearing immigrants, but he was talking about how people get upset because they're living in the suburbs. And he's talking about how American citizens have a right to get upset if somebody moves into your neighborhood and they buy a 3-bedroom house and 20 people move into the house and they speak a different language and it's getting rowdy over there. He didn't mention the cat eating, but the host then did, and he laughed about that. So, like, on the one hand, you know, all of the migrants are in the country are jamming into one house like a clown car and eating pets, and then 2 weeks later, it's like, well, that's not actually true. They've bought 30 million houses, and your house is expensive because of them, because migrants are coming into the country and I guess competing with millennials for the condos, the apartments they want to buy in Brooklyn. Like it is, he doesn't care, right? It's just like, at the moment, whatever argument he could make to blame immigrants is the argument he's going to make, because it's a safe place for him. He knows that Donald Trump won't get mad at him if he does that. He knows that the MAGA base put them in because of animus towards immigrants. And so, like, that's all he's going to do. There's one other thing they've done this week that I think is worth noting on the costs, because they have considered one policy change. And that is, they're thinking about rolling back some of the tariffs. The New York Times was reporting this yesterday. And that caught my eye, because I was like, hey, that's interesting. You think that rolling back the tariffs is going to lower prices. I think that would imply that putting the tariffs on raised the prices, you would think. And so, you know, that I think is the only substantive move that they have made, or that they're talking about making, is rolling back what they did to create the problem in the first place.
I just got my first ever wave of sympathy for Caroline Leavitt, who spent 11 months at the podium saying that tariffs do not make prices go up and tariffs are not taxes, and fighting with Republicans who go on Sunday shows and say the opposite. So it will be interesting to see, one, if they do that, and two, how they explain it. I want to show you, Ian, some of the polling on what Trump has done the last few days and weeks. This is AP polling on Trump's handling of the federal government. 33% approve, 67% disapprove. More interestingly, among the Republican Party, and again, these are high numbers for normal Republicans, but for Trump, this number is usually in the 80s and 90s. Only 67, no, I'm sorry, among Republicans, 68% approve of Donald Trump's handling of the federal government. 32% of Republicans disapprove of Donald Trump's handling of the federal government. It shows that even the shutdown was an argument that Trump lost among a larger swath of his own party than is usually going along with whatever escapade he takes them.
Well, I think I was on here maybe 2 weeks ago or so, and I said, we're going to win, by which I meant those who believe in democracy and freedom against the forces of authoritarianism and illiberalism are going to ultimately prevail. And Nicole, you said that's about the most optimistic you'd ever seen me. And
You
at the
stopped
time
me
I
in my
said that,
tracks, yes.
well, at the time I said that, I was looking at a couple of data points, right? I was looking at the Pentagon press corps, including Fox News, refusing to accept Secretary Hegseth's gag order. I was looking at America's airports refusing to air a propaganda video about the shutdown that Secretary Noem had sent around. I was looking at the universities, a lot of which had initially caved to some of the administration's demands, but more recently rejecting the sort of preferred status in exchange for their academic independence. And I was looking at all those as signs that maybe America's institutions were starting to see that the emperor was maybe not naked, but wasn't fully clothed, and were willing to stand up. And I think since then, we obviously had the electorate in districts around the country, states and localities vote fundamentally in opposition to the direction that Trump was taking the country. And now we're seeing the polls like the one you just showed, with him hitting really kind of rock bottom lows for both of his 2 terms in office. And the reason why this is important in the battle between democracy and authoritarianism is because it is very difficult for extremely unpopular leaders to consolidate authoritarian control. We saw this in South Korea when President Yoon tried to declare martial law, when polls had him somewhere between 13 and 19% approval, and that just didn't work. Whereas in contrast, where you have relatively popular authoritarian-minded leaders like Narendra Modi in India, it's a lot more likely that they will be able to undermine the checks and balances and the rule of law that are the hallmarks of liberal democracy. And so Trump is essentially in a race, and I'm so glad that David's on here because he's written about this. Trump is in a race to consolidate power before the unpopular things he does make it much harder for him to effectively do so. And I think right now he's losing that race.
Yeah, I mean, David, we've turned to you, I think, as often as we can get you on this show for the way you've helped us understand not just the economic debacle that the tariff regime represented, but the political debacle it could create for Donald Trump in terms of how it would completely, these are my words, not you wrote more eloquently than I'm going to say it, but sort of bifurcate the economy, that people that bought things would be hurt far more noticeably in their lives than people at the higher ends of the economy. It feels like that took a minute to sink in, but that is some of the political pain that Trump is either being told about because it's not clear that he's seeing it or believing it. He keeps calling it a con job. He keeps blaming Democrats somehow for his own supporters feeling economic insecurity and anxiety. But what you laid out seems to have come to pass or started to come to pass.
Well, let's revert to that point about housing that is so important. It is true. Immigrants buy housing. They also build housing. About a quarter of the construction workforce in this country is immigrant labor. And that's higher in states like California and Florida that are farther south. And it's even higher in the specialties that are most demanding and dangerous, like drywalling and especially roofing. So if you were to successfully round up and deport every immigrant in the United States, you might free up some housing. You'd also bring new housing construction to an almost complete start. And the reason that that's an important point to drive home is, as with the tariffs, that J.D. Vance in particular is advocating a kind of magical thinking about the economy that Republicans were, we thought, sent on earth to oppose. Republicans were, the Republican job, and I was a Republican for a long time, you were as well, was to say money doesn't grow on trees, markets work. Every worker is also a producer. Every producer is also a consumer. The Trump immigration policy is on the way to shrink the population of the United States in 2025 for the first time since the beginning of the census in 1790. They're going to be, maybe there'll be a baby boom in the last few weeks of the year, but so we don't know the exact figure, but on the present trajectory, at the January of 2026, there will be fewer people living in the United States than in January of 2025. That ramifies through the whole economy. And you combine a supply crunch because of the tariffs, a supply crunch because you've shrunk the workforce, and selective raids that depress building and building industries that make housing, new housing, less available. Because the idea, hey, J.D. Vance said there would be more of these houses. Houses don't last forever. You can't say if there had been no immigrants that we could all happily live in the houses that were built in 1964. We don't want to live in the houses that were built in 1964. We want to live in the houses that are newer. Those houses have to be built, and they have to be built by somebody. And they're being built. They were being built by the people whom Trump and J.D. Vance are now rounding up and deporting, with effects on everybody's costs.
I mean, it's such an important point about everything they've done, right? I mean, the war with the rhetorical war with Canada, insulting them, making them the 51st state, the tariffs. I mean, that now has an impact on tourism being felt, and because the federal government's being the most generous way, I think we can call it, stingy with data, you're seeing it in state data coming out about tourism. I mean, everything they have done that I can think of or that we've covered has been depressive to economic growth. What in your view is even available to them? And if they, I mean, they don't seem to mean what they're saying. J.D. Vance is blaming immigrants. Donald Trump is blaming Democrats for a, quote, con job. What are you seeing that could actually help Americans?
Well, what could help Americans is to drop the tariffs. That would be a big help. But there's some, as Tim said, some baby steps on the way to doing that. But what they're mostly doing is villainizing the Federal Reserve and trying to put pressure on the Federal Reserve to bring it more into presidential control. So the plan is there's going to be less of everything in the economy because of the tariffs, because of the roundups, less of everything. But we're going to try to make money cheaper. We're going to have more cash and fewer things. That's how you get inflation. That's how you get stagflation, because when you have fewer things but more cash, you are producing less and creating more money with which to buy the things that you're not producing. And that's back to 1977, 78 with low growth, high inflation.
I mean, Tim, that's an unbelievable legacy for Scott Bessent. I don't know if Howard Lutnick realizes that'll be his legacy or cares, but Bessent should.
Yeah, there's some reporting I just saw before I came on how well Lutnick's family is doing in the markets right now. Just coincidence, I guess, that the Lutnick family is doing better than ever. So that might be his legacy, it turns out. But no, look, here's the thing. Bessent, when you came into Trump 2.0, most of the people that came to the cabinet this time, as we discussed, different than 1.0, were fully on board with the agenda, right? There were just a couple of people that were pointed to that people were saying, well, maybe they can be bumpers on some elements of his agenda. Marco Rubio at State and Bessent at Treasury, the two most noteworthy. And I guess at times it seems like Bessent did, protect Trump and Lutnick from their worst impulses, particularly back in the spring when they were really pressing the gas on the tariffs. But once that was accomplished, Lutnick has now spent the last 6 months doing exactly what Marjorie Taylor Greene said not to do at the beginning. Gaslighting people, speaking illiterately about the economy, saying things he knows are not true about what the impact of the tariffs are going to be on the economy, about the trajectory of the economy, about what things are costing the American people these days. And he's decided to do it in a very kind of haughty manner. And, eventually the bill's going to come due for that, because the economy is one thing. And look, you can trick people, you can trick your own supporters, not the whole country, into thinking that you won the election when you lost, right? Because they don't know any different one way or the other, right? They're being told something by people that they trust. You can't trick them into thinking that their grocery bill is lower than it is, right? They experience that when they go to the store every week. And I think that is it's going to be much harder for Trump and Bessent and Lutnick to use the tools they used in the 2020 election to trick their own voters into advancing a big lie when it comes to the economy. Much tougher on the economy than it was on democracy.
Which is sort of a reality wrapped in a tragedy, wrapped in everything that we talk about. I need all of you to stick around. I have to sneak in a break. On the other side, more.